Hello, today we're going to start episode 2 of Fix My Deck. This is actually going to be the first submission I got to the forum. I went a little bit out of order on the first episode, but after this I'm just going to go through them in the order I got them. So this is a Gluntch the Bestower deck. Gluntch is Selesnya colors and has three different abilities, or it has one ability that does three things. It says at the beginning of your end step, choose a player. They put 2/1/1 counters on a creature they control, choose a second player to draw a card, and choose a third player to create 2 treasure tokens. This person who submitted the deck list said that they're trying to make kind of a group hug deck, and they wanted to use Doubling Season because they pulled that. And the deck is kind of inconsistent and unreliable. They've won with Approach of the Second Sun and Helix Pinnacle. But again, it's unreliable, which makes sense because there's no way in those colors to tutor up Approach of the Second Sun, at least without using some sort of colorless artifact. And they don't have a way to tutor up Helix Pinnacle or a way to generate infinite mana for it. So you just kind of have to manually input the 100 or so mana you need to make that work. And they mentioned second place tends to come easy, but it's hard to have enough board presence to win. And that makes a lot of sense. A lot of times with these kinds of group hug decks, it's easy to survive until you get to second place, but that's hard to finish out that game. The first thing I want to do here is it's at 34 lands. I always start with 39 lands that's just my starting average, and we're going to start from there. We might change that out later. First thing we want is another win con. And since this player is doing tokens, and I should mention they have a budget of under $50, so we're going to try and keep all the cards cheap. The first card is Stormherd, which is going to give us a ton of Pegasus creature tokens with flying. It's 10 mana, but since this game deck is surviving to the end, I'm going to assume that it can reliably get up to 10 mana. And this will be one way for it to finish out the game. So we're putting counters on things, and we're generating some tokens. I want to add Rishkar to help turn all of our creatures that we're putting counters on into mana dorks. The second thing is I want to add Jiangyangu Wildcrafter, and this is also a very cheap card that will again turn anything we put 1/1 counters on into a mana dork, and then it's got an ability to put those counters on a creature. So that's going to give us more ways to accelerate our mana. The next thing I want to do is this player has a big sideboard, and they mentioned owning some of these cards. And Ghostly Prison is really strong. Normally I would say put that in, but they said they're already surviving into a 1v1 situation, so I'm not sure that's necessary. Nils is good, but that's $6. Oh, they have this Shrewfish Sprout Shire. That feels like a good ad for this deck too, and I think they said they already owned it, so let's move that to the main board. Now, unfortunately, when I started looking at this deck, it was already heavy on 3-drops, and now I just added even more 3-drops into a deck, which has a 3-mana commander, which is not ideal. So we might, if we have the option to get rid of 3-drops, we might do that in some places. We also have a lot of mana rocks here, which in green, I tend to run very few mana rocks. Usually just Soul Ring, because I'd always rather than play something like Arcane Signet, which can get blown up incidentally due to artifact board wipes, I would always rather run lands, because at least in my play group, we don't do mass land destruction. And so if instead of Arcane Signet, you play something like Nature's Lore, which puts a land into play, then you get basically the same effect without the risk of it getting destroyed. And also this deck has some ways to blow up all non-land permanents. It would feel bad to exile our own artifacts, so that's another kind of good reason to deprioritize artifact ramp and add in other ramp instead. These 1-mana dorks are great since you turn 1, play them, and then turn 2, you can play Gluntch. Player might already have all of the cheap mana dorks. Let's see, Fernhorn Elves, Avacyn's Pilgrim. I love Scryfall. We could probably add Boreal Druid because this player probably has enough color fixing. Ooh, 340. I don't know if it's worth $3.40. Let's see. Elvish Mystic and Findhorn Elves. So we have those. We have Avacyn's Pilgrim. Birds of Paradise is kind of expensive, so we'll avoid that. Gilded Goose would be cool for this deck because you get the synergies off the tokens creation stuff. Gilded Goose, 129. Cool, that's a good one. So this will give us that way, another way to cast the commander on turn 2. And then since it has this like token creation engine, now we have another card that Academy Manufacturer actually works with, and Doubling Season. So I think that's a good add for us. Llanowar Elves. Does that Llanowar Elves, 79 cents. So that's another good one. One reason that I think it's good to have these creatures come down to is like there's gonna be times when I turn 1 Llanowar Elves, turn 2 the commander, and then maybe we want to put 1/1 counters on the elves or something and try to start turning them into a blocker or attacker. So okay, I think that's mostly what we want. Another one that I think could actually be worth it is, so I think this thing, Sylvan Cariad, could be good because it's got hexproof, so stay alive. It's something where you might want to put counters on it to help make a good blocker. Ooh, $6. Probably not worth $6, so let's not do that one. So I think we just added 2 more mana dorks, plus we added Rishkar, which acts as a mana dork, and Xiangyang. So we're going to get rid of the Arcane Signet, the Felwar Stone, the Thought Vessel, and the Decanter of Endless Water. And now that player did have a couple... 2 of those cards provide unlimited hand size, and normally I wouldn't advocate people run Reliquary Tower, but if this player is concerned about hand size and needing to discard, Reliquary Tower will be a great replacement for those cards because we have Tempt with Discovery and Pierre's Whim, so we have ways to tutor for Reliquary Tower into play. And then also if you're in the situation where you're drawing so many cards that you might have to discard, then you'll probably draw into Reliquary Tower or one of those spells that will tutor it up for you. So now we're at 98 cards, and Sterling Grove would be a really good one too, because that will protect our important enchantments and give us a way to tutor up Helix Pinnacle. And Helix Pinnacle, I think, is going to get more viable now because it takes 100 mana, but now that we have things like Xiangyang, like maybe we'll get a lot more mana dorks out. So I think, so that is a $5 card, but I think that's worth $5. Yeah, there's some other ones in here really good, like Viridian Revel. That card is so strong in just about any green deck. So I think another thing we want here is we want more ways to wipe the board, actually, but in an asymmetric way, because we have ways to do that in a symmetrical way. But this card I think is worth $5. Winds of Abandon. You know, it's got Overload. It's exile target creature you don't control. You can exile all your opponent's creatures, and then they get a tutor for basics into play. So it's still kind of got like a group hug aspect because, you know, you exile the creatures, but then they get to have basics into play, at least if they have basics. This also punishes people who don't run basics in their decks or hardly run any. Oh, another card we really want, I just remembered, is Genesis. So this is a great fog effect, and this is actually also another 1v1 win con because someone will swing at you for lethal, and then you cast Arachnogenesis, and you prevent all that damage to save you, and then create a bunch of spider tokens, and then you potentially just swing back for the win and kill them. So I mentioned some of the 2 mana ramp as well. So we're at 101 cards, but I think it's still worth in this deck putting in things like Nature's Lore. How much is Nature's Lore? $4. Probably not worth $4. But what about Farseek? 249. How about Steve? 149. Sakura Tribe Elder could be good because, you know, it's a creature if we want to be a creature. Because sometimes, like, in a deck like this, it's good just to have more creatures. I mean, for one, you can, you know, block and then sacrifice Sakura Tribe Elder after you block to chump block. Or, you know, sometimes you just want these creatures out so you can put counters on them. You don't always have to sacrifice Steve. Maybe turn 2 you play Steve, turn 3 you play Gluntch and put counters on Steve, and then turn 4 you play Rishkar and then put a counter on Rishkar and a counter on Gluntch. And now you have 3 mana dorks in play on turn 4, so you have 7 mana total. So there's, you know, other ways you can take advantage of having more creatures in this deck. We're at 102 cards. I think this is probably getting pretty close to being viable. One card we should actually add in this deck that I love is Sun Titan, because this is just, Sun Titan's a 6/6 vigilance, so he's good blocker and attacker, and then he's going to return things from the graveyard into play, and that can include a lot of our important enchantments. Like, this player has Solitary Confinement, and you can use Sun Titan as part of kind of like a Solitary Confinement lock where you sacrifice Solitary Confinement, but then you just play Sun Titan and return it, or just attack with Sun Titan and return it to play. So that way you don't have to skip your draw step or discard a card. And, you know, you can return Sterling Grove to play to retutor for it. And then, of course, it works with all of the fetch lands. Since this player has the fetch lands, it's like you play Sun Titan to return Windswept Heath to play, use Windswept Heath, next turn attack with Sun Titan, return Windswept Heath to play. So you can get a lot of value out of Sun Titan in a deck like this. I wanted to run, this is a very good card for this deck now, Inspiring Call. So Inspiring Call is going to protect our own board when we have 1/1 counters on our creatures, and it's also going to potentially draw us a bunch of cards. So that's 104 cards. So let's cut some things. Oh, actually, I think we should, I mean, just like in the last video where I talked about adding the mazes, any mazes that are affordable, we should add in. Let's see, how much is Core Haven? $20. No, thank you. Misdefine, that's $1. So I think both of these are probably worth adding. Especially with Misdefine Maze, it's like you can give someone those 1/1 counters, but then they swing at you or swing at someone else, and then you exile it, and then you remove all the 1/1 counters you just gave them. Also, Labyrinth of Scophos is fun with the fact it can remove a blocking creature from combat, so you can do tricky things like block with something that would die, but then you just remove it from combat. And actually, speaking of blocking and dying, I think Acidic Slime would be good for this deck. Oh, there's one more card I wanted to add. There's a new card. So this is great because it's a 2-drop. And this kind of has a similar effect to the Ozolith, which I think that card's like $20 or $30 or something. But this is 50 cents. And it's going to give us a similar-ish effect. Plus it has this extra ability to put these like flying and lifelink counters on things. And that's a tap thing, and because we have things now like Rishkar and Zhang Yanggu, we're going to potentially have ways to tap this guy down without even swinging with him. So even if you can't get through safely, you'll be able to still tap him down. Or also you can swing, and then, I mean, this is pretty mana intensive, but you can swing and then do the Labyrinth of Scophos to remove him from combat so he won't die. So now we're at 108. So I'm going to stop trying to add cards, and we're going to drop some cards. So I mentioned this in the last video, but I personally haven't had good luck with these kinds of cards because in my experience, people just put 1/1 counters on their creatures when they aren't planning on attacking you anyways, and then at the end of the game, when it's that 1v1 situation, they just start saying no, obviously. So I think we should get rid of this card. Plus it's a 3-drop, so we can get rid of 3-drops. We added an Acidic Slime, and this is a 3-drop, so I think we can drop Reclamation Sage. This card is not a very strong card. This reminded me, I want to add in Selfless Squire. So this is actually another potential win con and another way to keep us alive. So Selfless Squire, it's going to be kind of like Arachnogenesis, where it's going to enter and it's going to be huge if people try and swing at you for lethal. So when you get down to that 1v1 situation, you flash this in. If someone swings at you for lethal, it enters as a giant creature, and then the next turn, potentially, you can just swing right back and kill them. So that's going to be a better flash option than this Resolute Reinforcements. I know this creates tokens, but even if you have Doubling Season out, I mean, you're still only getting 3 power and toughness for 2 mana, which is a little bit on the weak side. For similar reasons, I would actually take out Noble Heritage. I like this in certain decks, but I personally think we're better off dropping it. Wild Growth is a card I normally don't like to run. We did add 1 or 2 more ways to turn 1 the commander, and since this thing can get blown up easily, I think we should drop it. Raise the Alarm. This card is also a little bit on the weak side. I wonder if there's... Sometimes when I'm searching for cards, what I do is I just go to EDH rec page for that card, and then I start looking at what exists. Yeah, maybe March of the Multitudes could be stronger, or Aura Mutation. Ooh, 350. March of the Multitudes is cheaper. This card's kind of cool because it's got Convoke also, so it kind of scales with the state of the game. Like if you already have a bunch of creatures into play, then it basically, another way for them to function is mana dorks, and we can get a bunch of soldier tokens. Instant speed too with lifelink. I think this is a stronger card. I know that Raise the Alarm is mana efficient, but I mean still it's 2 mana for 2 power and toughness in total, which this is more like a 40 card draft kind of card to play. Oh, we're at 42 lands, which I think is higher than we need for this deck. This deck's probably fine with 39 lands. Like we've got early game ramp, and then the commander will start drawing us cards on turn 3, which will mean we'll more likely draw lands if we need them. We can use the commander's ability on turn 3 to start drawing cards. We need to remove 1 card, which is always difficult. I think maybe we should get rid of this Hydra because it doesn't really have any evasion like Trample or anything, and oftentimes we're only going to be adding 1/1/1 counter to it. So let's just drop that for now. And then I want to... That might be the wrong choice, but let's just play test this and see how this goes. So this Obenham's keepable. Like, we're going to have the mana to play the commander. One thing I didn't mention is, you know, people talk about how, in something like a 3-mana commander, don't run 2 mana ramp like Nature's Lore, because then you ramp into 4 mana on turn 3. So what's the point of that? But the thing is, a lot of times, especially when we have more budget mana bases, lands enter tapped anyways. So it can be the case that you cast Nature's Lore turn 2 to get that 3rd land, and then your 4th land is going to be a land like this that enters tap. People, I think they need to worry a little bit less about some of that curve stuff at times. Not always. There's still plenty of times it's valid, but sometimes they need to worry less about that stuff. And then also there's times you cast Nature's Lore to get to 4 mana, and you don't actually want to cast your commander. You want to cast one of your 4 drops. Like in this deck, there's a lot of good 4 drops. That's kind of a bit of an aside, but let's check this out. 1, 2... Did I draw a card yet? No. So we'll draw for my turn. So this will enter tapped. Turn 2, we'd probably play a Plains into Flump, which I like that card. This is actually a very good starting hand because now we play Gluntch. And we've got this great blocker that's gonna draw some cards. At this point, because I have Inspiring Call in hand, my temptation would be to put the counters on either Gluntch or Flump. And then, or either that, or maybe get the treasure tokens. So next turn we can play Mind's Eye, and then we can start drawing a lot of cards. Anyways, I think this is actually a pretty good start. We'll say we create the treasure tokens, we draw. Next turn, Croson Verge, tap. Actually, no. Yeah, Croson Verge tapped, and then we'll use the treasures to do Mind's Eye. And maybe we'll also put counters on Gluntch because we want to get things with counters on them so we can protect them later with Inspiring Call. Then we draw. So now we have these 4 lands. We can play Gavany Township. And then potentially what we can do here is, if this is the kind of game, the meta where there's a lot of board wipes, we might just want to sit on our mana in case we need to protect our commander and flump and draw 2 cards off of them. Also, basically what we're doing, we're going to sit on this mana if we're concerned about board wipes, and then we'll just be using Mind's Eye maybe to draw cards. And then if we make it to a point where it seems safe to do, we can use Croson Verge. So I think at this point, we're in a pretty good state. Like, we have a way to save ourselves from a board wipe. We have a way to, like, start drawing out a lot of cards. I think this is a pretty good state for the game long term. So let's try a new hand. All right, so this hand, we've got Elvish Mystic. I don't like seeing Stormherd in the opening hand because that's a late game play. But that's the main thing I don't like about this hand. I'm going to try Mulligan. Let's see what happens. Okay, I like this hand a lot better. We've got, now we can turn 1 the Elvish Mystic. And we've got Savala, which we also want to play early in the game. So let's do turn 1, Command Tower, Elvish Mystic, draw. Turn 2, we would just play this Canopy Vista tapped most likely. Nope, that's wrong. We're going to use the Evolving Wilds. So that way after we play our forest, then Canopy Vista will eventually enter untapped. So forest. What am I doing? I didn't want to do that. I want to play a forest and play Gluntch. Okay. I might have gotten confused about the game state now. Gluntch, I'm not sure what I would have done. Probably create 2 treasure tokens, because that seems pretty good early on in the game. Oh, we got Viridian Revel, and we've got Shufus. So I think at this point, we either play Viridian Revel and then give someone treasure tokens so we can start drawing a bunch of cards, or we play Shufus and start swinging at people so we can start getting a bunch of tokens out. I kind of like that play because, like, if we have Shufus and people don't have blockers yet, then we can start creating a bunch of tokens, and then eventually we have the potential to create, to use all of those Saproling tokens to convoke March of the Multitudes to make a whole bunch more tokens. So this is also a very strong start. Let's mulligan one, or do a new hand. Drawing. I guess I just decided to keep this hand because I hit draw. So we'll see what happens with this hand. Turn 1, Helix Pinnacle. This is actually a bad starting hand because we have 2 kind of like late game cards in our opening hand. So that is what it is. So we'll play Canopy Vista, Gaia Reach, Gluntch. So this starting hand, this is kind of working. I think we'd probably be fine, but in hindsight, I wouldn't have kept it if I had read it a little more closely. But anyways, this deck seems like it's working pretty well to me. I think it would be viable in my play group. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. And I hope if you're the one who made this deck that this was useful. And at least even if you don't follow this deck list exactly, you got some ideas for some cards or some lines of play that you didn't consider before. Thank you for watching.